Thank you. Hey everyone, so I'm Sean McDonald, and for this session, I want to show you all how to look at the Amazon Bedrock and Well-Architected Framework and kind of start to think about how we can bring those together. So, Amazon Bedrock is a managed service that allows you to use large language models, either the internal Amazon ones or from other AI startups. And what it allows you to do is allows you to start to utilize those large language models and really start to play with them to figure out how to utilize them. And for anyone who hasn't heard of the Well-Architected Framework, that is a set of best practices, questions, and white papers that embolden our best practices on how to use the platform, as well as how to go ahead and measure, improve, and then start to evolve your application workloads. So for anyone that's done a wafer before, you might know that when you have maybe your team or you have a large group that goes together that has worked on your application sets before, it takes a while to get those people in the same room to start to identify what is maybe some of the best practices for one of the pillars that you might be covering. So let's say you're doing the operations pillar part of a review. How does that look like? And maybe trying to get the right people in the room for that. So this solution here is what I want to start to talk about, how to start to ease some of that pain and start to accelerate and really start to identify and how to have those starting conversations. So for anyone who has not heard of the AWS Well-Architected Framework before, let's talk a little bit about that. So as I mentioned, the AWS Well-Architected Framework is a framework with a set of best practices, questions, and white papers that allow you as a customer to learn about the best practices. The questions are meant to help you measure how to evaluate where you are in your application workloads for those best practices, and ideally, how you can start to improve by looking at the results of how those workload reviews have come together. And those best practices are broken down into 6 pillars. So you have operations, you have security, you have reliability, you have performance, you have cost, and then you have sustainability. So let's talk about, see if we can try to bring these two together. So I want to talk about our example scenario that I'm going to put together here. So if you look at the diagram here it's just a very traditional 3-tiered web app. You have your application load balancer, you have the actual application itself on the web app server, and then you have just a set of RDS servers. And from there, you can see that it's multi-AZ and that they're segmented into multiple VPCs. So very straightforward, very just basic diagram. But let's say that this is my application diagram. I have multiple people that are working on this, but I can't necessarily pull them away to help do a well-architected framework review, and I want to figure out what best practices I'm hitting and maybe which ones that I would like to have focus on with the team and start to discuss and see where we're at or how we can start to improve based upon the well-architected framework. So, if I was to open up the AWS console today and open up Amazon Bedrock, this is going to be the screen that you're going to be presented with. So from here, you're going to be presented with the foundation models that are available to deploy on Amazon Bedrock itself. So this could be our own, the Amazon Titan one. You could see the Claude by Anthropic, or you can even see some others here, like the Llama 3 by Meta. So for the sake of this example here, we're going to end up using the Claude by Anthropic model. So when I go to select the language model and go to deploy, I'm going to be brought with the option to bring it to the playground. So here's the chat playground, and this is exactly what you'd see when you go to deploy the model itself. So, and from here, this is going to allow us to start to figure out and start to fine-tune what we would want to do with this model to get it ready to basically present our architecture diagram and to be able to start asking the questions that we need to ask to start to determine where we're at within the actual AWS well-architected framework and understand what best practices we might be meeting or which ones that we might need to start improving on. So if we look over to the right-hand side, you'll see there's configuration options there. From those configuration options, what we want to start looking at for the sake of this demo is that there's going to be a section there for system prompts. So system prompts allow you to fine-tune how the responses from the language model are going to come out. So this could be if I want to format maybe how the best practices will be coming down, whether they're going to be in bulleted form, or if I would like to go ahead and change those in a format where maybe I want the tone of how the best practices are being brought back to me from the language model to be more professional or more loose, whatever would be the case there. And then you have temperature. So this one is an important feature here. So temperature allows the language model to either, the foundation model to either be more creative or become more consistent in its responses. So for the sake of today's example, we're going to set that to 0. So 0 would allow the response to be more consistent. So let's say if I did this, but I wanted maybe another member on my team to go and do this, they could do the same thing with the same diagram and receive the same responses. So let's talk about the prompt here at the bottom. So if we looked at where in the chat playground at the bottom, you have the section where you can start interacting with the foundation model. So I won't go ahead and read this prompt word for word, but for what I did here is I basically said, my team is working on a well-architected review. We have this architecture diagram, and I'm trying to figure out how I should start having this conversation with my team. If I provide the diagram, can you tell me what best practices I am hitting according to the security pillar of the well-architected framework? So from there, I attach the image, and I go ahead and click run. So the screenshot might be a little hard to read here, but I'll try to give the basics of what it's finding. So the response is that it has broken it down into 2 different sections here. So we have a section where it's saying, here are the best practices that I'm actually achieving, followed by a separate section that says, here are some areas where you can start now deep diving with your team to determine, are these actual deficiencies, or is there something more that you need to start engaging with the team? So in this case, it's provided us 6 action items that we should probably start discussing with our team on. But it also found some best practices that we do appear to be covering. For example, in network security, it's determined that we're using VPCs to isolate our actual resources in private subnets. It's also determined that we're using RDS in a way that we would like to see, which would be separating and have data redundancy. So it's found other best practices outside of just security. But the fact that it's brought some of the stuff up here, it's now expedited the way that you would perform a wafer, so now you can have places to start these conversations as opposed to trying to determine from 0. But let's kind of think about this a little bit differently now. So we did this with the architecture diagram. We've seen what it looks like with the diagram, but as we all know, diagrams have become obsolete. Some diagrams might not have all the technologies that are included when they are done. So what if we had a JSON template or like a CloudFormation template, right? So in this case, we're using a CloudFormation template that's formatted in JSON. And the idea is if we had this, which we know this would be more likely up to date as opposed to an architecture template, what could we actually do with that? So if we go back to our prompt again, and rather than just giving it the picture, instead I've copied and pasted the actual JSON template into the actual prompt here. Asking the same question though, of course, of my team is working on performing a wafer. I don't have an architecture or diagram. However, I do have the JSON CloudFormation template here. Can you tell me what I am doing well at as opposed to what I'm not aligned with as far as the well-architected best practices go for the security pillar? So from there, I actually get a pretty compounded response. It was big enough that I needed to break it up into 2 different screenshots. So if you remember from the first screen, we ended up seeing that the first section was best practices that were being followed. So as opposed to having the few that we had there, we had, I think, maybe about 7 items. This has now been broken down. We still have 4, but now we have multiple items that it's actually been able to identify. One of the big ones that I was able to identify is that we're actually using Secrets Manager to do secrets for the RDS databases as opposed to, whatever may be the case from the diagram itself. But because that wasn't documented in the diagram, it's actually been able to determine that, additionally, you are doing some things that were not in the diagram. And this is because we were able to provide it, that infrastructure as code, into the actual foundation model for it to determine what we are using as opposed to what we're not using. Now, on the flip side, it does provide more recommendations, and this is because now it's starting to see how the VPCs were set up, how networking was set up, how the databases were set up. So one of the things now that is different here is that it's now asking about how the ALB is configured, considering that it's not only listening to HTTP when it should be listening to HTTPS, going back in line with some of the well-architected security best practices. So, as you can see here, providing it the infrastructure as code data has given the foundational model more information to work with to then provide back to your team to work with them on actually having deeper conversations and accelerating that well-architected framework review. So, just to kind of give an idea of what we just did here. So we went ahead and we did this with the diagram, and we also did it with the infrastructure as code itself. So one thing I want to be very, very just loud about here is that it's good to use generative AI when it makes sense. Now, in no way should we just say, let's run this and say, okay, this is the well-architected framework review, we're done, right? Obviously, it needs to be validated, and we can tell the difference here because as we provided more data, aka when we gave it the infrastructure as code, we saw that we had better results. We were able to see, oh, there's more things that are not, in the diagram itself. We were able to validate that there was more best practices being followed, but we're also able to validate that there were things that were still misconfigured, things that we couldn't see from the diagram itself. So even though these two sources are great data, always being able to have more data is always going to be more useful when producing results for these. And that's it. Does anyone have any questions?